the water of Lake Talcott had always been unnaturally still. Even during the harshest winter storms, when wind whipped through the surrounding pines and ice formed in delicate crystallizations along the shoreline, and the center of the lake remained an eerie mirror. Local residents spoke of it in hushed tones, claiming the lake swallowed sounds and kept secrets. Most dismissed these tales as small-town superstition, the kind that flourishes in remote communities where entertainment comes from stories passed down through generations. But on October 17, 1994, the lake claimed 2 more souls for its collection, and this time the entire nation would eventually learn its secrets. Thomas and Eleanor Winters arrived at the Talcott Lake House on October 14, 1994. They were celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary with a week-long getaway at the secluded property Thomas had inherited from his grandfather. The lake house, a 2-story timber structure with large windows facing the water, had stood empty for nearly a decade. Local real estate agents had approached Thomas multiple times with generous offers, particularly from a development company interested in turning the lakefront property into a resort, but Thomas had always declined. Some places should remain untouched, he once told Eleanor, according to friends who would later be interviewed by investigators, and that Lake House holds more history than most museums. What exactly he meant by that statement would become a central question in the investigation that followed their disappearance. The couple had been meticulous in their planning. They had stocked enough food and supplies for 10 days, though they planned to stay for only 7. Thomas, an environmental engineer with a reputation for thoroughness, had arranged for a local handyman to inspect the property a week before their arrival, ensuring the plumbing and electrical systems were functioning properly after years of disuse. The handyman, Gerald Hoffman, would later tell police that the house was cold in ways that didn't make sense. "I checked the insulation, the windows, everything," Hoffman stated in his initial interview. "But there was this pocket of cold air in the main bedroom that wouldn't go away, even with the heaters blasting. I told Mr. Winters about it when he called to check, but he just laughed and said they'd bring extra blankets." This detail might have been dismissed as irrelevant had it not been for what investigators discovered in that same bedroom months later. The last confirmed sighting of Thomas and Eleanor was at Decker's General Store in the nearby town of Port Marrow on the afternoon of October 16th. Security camera footage showed them purchasing additional groceries, a bottle of champagne, and oddly, 4 new flashlights and a large supply of batteries. "They seemed happy, excited even," said Meredith Decker, who had been working the register that day. Eleanor mentioned something about finally solving the puzzle tonight. "I assumed they were talking about a jigsaw or something to pass the time at the lake. Nothing seemed off about them." That evening, at approximately 7:42 p.m., Eleanor called her sister, Patricia Hammond, from the landline at the lake house. The call lasted 11 minutes. Patricia would later describe the conversation as completely normal, with Eleanor mentioning the beautiful sunset over the lake and their plans to have a special anniversary dinner that night. "She did say one strange thing right before hanging up," Patricia told detectives. She said, "If you don't hear from me for a few days, don't worry. Tom thinks we might discover something that requires our full attention." When I asked what she meant, she just laughed and said, "You know how he gets with his family mysteries. Always making mountains out of molehills." That call would be the last anyone ever heard from Thomas and Eleanor Winters. The couple was reported missing on October 21st, when they failed to return to their home in Springfield as scheduled. Thomas hadn't shown up for an important work meeting, and Eleanor, a high school art teacher, had missed 2 days of classes. This was described by everyone who knew them as completely out of character. Both were known for their reliability and responsibility. When local police arrived at the lake house on the evening of October 21st, they found a scene that defied easy explanation. The couple's car, a 1992 blue Honda Accord, was parked in the driveway. Their luggage remained in the bedroom, clothes neatly hung in the closet. Dirty dishes from what appeared to be their anniversary dinner sat in the sink, 2 plates with remnants of steak and asparagus, 2 champagne flutes with lipstick on one. A half-empty bottle of champagne stood on the counter. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. Well, there were no signs of a struggle, No indications of forced entry. The door had been locked, and officers had to break a window to gain entry after receiving no response to their knocks. Both Thomas and Eleanor's wallets, containing credit cards and cash, were found on the bedside table. Their cell phones, bulky by today's standards, were charging on the kitchen counter. It was as if the couple had simply vanished in the middle of cleaning up after dinner. The initial search focused on the lake and surrounding woods. Dive teams scoured the murky waters of Lake Talcott while search parties combed the dense forest that encircled the property. Dogs tracked the couple's scent to the end of the wooden dock behind the house, where it mysteriously disappeared. "It was the strangest thing I have ever seen in 20 years of search and rescue," said Canine Unit Officer Patrick Morgan. The dogs were agitated, whining in a way I'd never heard before. They refused to go near the water's edge. One of them actually backed away and hid under the porch of the house. They are trained not to do that. After a week of intensive searching with no results, the case began to take on the dimensions of a true mystery. The FBI was called in, led by Special Agent Laura Donovan, whose expertise in missing persons cases had earned her national recognition. She would later go on to write about the Winters case in her memoir, The Ones We Cannot Find, calling it the case that redefined my understanding of human nature and the depths of obsession. What Agent Donovan discovered in the lake house would set the investigation on a path no one had anticipated. In the main bedroom, beneath the queen-sized bed where that inexplicable cold spot had been noted by the handyman, investigators found a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small metal box, the kind typically used to store cash or important documents. Inside was a single leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age, and a black-and-white photograph from what appeared to be the 1930s. The photograph showed a group of 7 men standing in front of the lake house, which looked nearly identical to its present-day appearance. They were dressed in suits typical of the era, each wearing an unusual pin on their lapels, a design that resembled a stylized eye inside a triangle. On the back of the photograph, written in faded ink, were the words, "The Watchers of Talcott, Final Meeting, June 17, 1932. The journal belonged to Alfred Winters, Thomas's grandfather and the original owner of the lake house. The entries dated from 1930 to 1932 and detailed what Alfred described as our great work at the threshold. The writings were often cryptic, making references to the other side, the entities beyond the reflection, and the price of passage. One entry, dated May 3, 1932, stood out to investigators. "We have finally determined the correct sequence. Jameson believes the alignments must correspond to the celestial positions at the moment of the lake's formation. The geological surveys confirm what we have suspected. This is no natural basin. Something created this perfect circle with intent. Our measurements indicate that the next window will open on October 17th, exactly 62 years from now. By then I will be gone, but the responsibility must pass to my descendants. They must be warned. They must be prepared. Or they must stay away." The final entry, dated June 18, 1932, contained only one sentence: "God forgive us for what we have done." Experts in various fields were consulted: historians, geologists, even experts in occult studies, but none could provide a definitive explanation for Alfred's writings. The Watchers of Talcott did not appear in any historical records of local organizations. The pin design seen in the photograph matched no known fraternal order or secret society. Most puzzling was Alfred's reference to the lake's formation. Geological surveys confirmed that Lake Talcott was indeed almost perfectly circular, and with a nearly uniform depth of 187 feet throughout, an unusual formation for a natural lake. But carbon dating and sediment analysis suggested the lake was thousands of years old, not artificially created as Alfred had implied. The investigation broadened, focusing now on the history of the lake and the 7 men in the photograph. One by one, they were identified through public records. Alfred Winters, Thomas's grandfather, a professor of theoretical physics at Miskatonic University. William Jameson, an astronomer from the Greenwich Observatory who had taken sabbatical in the United States in the early 1930s. Harold Pierce, a local doctor with an interest in unusual medical cases. Richard Sullivan, a wealthy industrialist who had financed much of the group's undocumented research. Frank Morgan, the town's sheriff during that period. Joseph Caldwell, a minister who had been removed from his position due to unorthodox beliefs. And finally, Edward Hawthorne, a writer known for a single obscure book titled Thresholds Between Worlds, published in 1931 and quickly pulled from circulation. Of the seven, all but one had died under unusual circumstances within a year of the final meeting photograph. William Jameson drowned in the Atlantic during his return voyage to England in August 1932. Harold Pierce disappeared while hiking alone near Lake Talcott in September 1932, his body never found. Richard Sullivan died in what was officially ruled a suicide in December 1932, though the method self-immolation in his locked study raised questions among investigators at the time. Frank Morgan was found in the woods near the lake in February 1933, his body frozen in a position described in the coroner's report as unnatural contortion, as if in the throes of terror. Joseph Caldwell was committed to an asylum in March 1933 after being found wandering the shores of Lake Talcott, repeatedly muttering, "They are coming through. We opened the door, and they are coming through." Edward Hawthorne vanished without a trace in April 1933. His home was found abandoned, with half-eaten meals on the table and his bed still made, in a scene eerily similar to the disappearance of Thomas and Eleanor 6 decades later. Only Alfred Winters survived, living until 1967, when he died of natural causes at the age of 87. According to those who knew him in his later years, he never returned to Lake Talcott after 1932 and forbade his family from visiting the property. He had a clause written into his will stating that the lake house must remain in the family, but should ideally remain uninhabited. Thomas, born 5 years after his grandfather's death, had apparently either never been told of this wish or had chosen to ignore it. As the investigation into Thomas and Eleanor's disappearance continued through the winter of 1994 and into 1995, another disturbing pattern emerged. Historical records revealed that there had been other disappearances around Lake Talcott, occurring in a cycle of approximately 62 years. In 1870, a surveyor and his assistant vanished while mapping the area. In 1808, a trapper and his wife were never seen again after setting up camp by the lake's edge. Local indigenous legends, largely dismissed by historians, spoke of the hungry waters and how every lifetime the lake must be fed. By the summer of 1995, the investigation had stalled. Despite one of the most extensive search operations in the state's history, no trace of Thomas and Eleanor Winters had been found. No bodies, no additional evidence, not even the slightest clue as to what might have happened to them on that October night. The case remained open but inactive, another unsolved mystery in the FBI's files, but until 2023, when everything changed. On April 12, 2023, nearly 29 years after the couple's disappearance, a severe drought hit the region around Lake Talcott. Water levels dropped to historic lows, revealing sections of the lake bed that had been submerged for centuries. A group of environmental scientists studying the impact of the drought made a discovery that would reignite the investigation and captivate the nation. As the water receded, a structure began to emerge from the center of the lake. At first visible only through aerial photography, it appeared to be a perfect circle of standing stones, each approximately 12 feet tall, arranged around a central platform. The structure had been hidden beneath the lake's surface, invisible to previous sonar scans due to an unusual composition that made the stones almost indistinguishable from the surrounding lake bed. Dr. Abigail Foster, the head of the scientific team, described the discovery in a press conference that would later be viewed by millions online. What we are looking at defies conventional archaeological understanding. The structure appears to be a type of megalithic monument, similar in some ways to Stonehenge, but with significant differences. The stones are carved with symbols that don't match any known ancient script or pictographic system. Carbon dating suggests they are approximately 4,000 years old. but the precision of their arrangement and the sophistication of the carving technology appears inconsistent with other structures from that time period. When images of the symbols were released to the public, a professor of comparative mythology at Princeton made a startling connection. Some of the symbols matched sketches found in Alfred Winters' journal, the same journal discovered beneath the floorboards of the lake house in 1994. The FBI reopened the case, and Agent Donovan, now in the final year before her retirement, returned to lead the investigation. What had been a missing persons case was now potentially something far more complex. As the lake continued to recede, more of the structure was revealed. The central platform, approximately 30 feet in diameter, contained what appeared to be a basin or pool in its center. Around the edge of this basin were carved what Dr. Foster described as human-like figures, but with proportions and features that seemed deliberately distorted. On May 3, 2023, exactly 91 years to the day after Alfred Winters had written about the correct sequence in his journal, divers were sent to examine the basin, which still contained water despite the drought. What they found inside would ultimately connect all the pieces of the puzzle and reveal a truth more disturbing than anyone had imagined. At the bottom of the basin, preserved in the airless environment of the deep water, were the remains of what appeared to be ritual offerings spanning centuries. Among these were personal items dating from different eras: coins, jewelry, weapons, each corresponding roughly to the 62-year cycle of disappearances. And there, among the ancient artifacts, were 2 wedding rings. When recovered and examined, the inscriptions inside confirmed what investigators had feared: TW2EW forever begins, list 10.12.89 Thomas and Eleanor Winters wedding bands. But it was what lay beneath these offerings that truly shocked investigators and would soon horrify the nation. As divers carefully removed the layers of artifacts, they uncovered a sealed chamber beneath the basin. Breaking through the stone seal, they discovered a small, waterproof metal container. Inside was a VHS tape, miraculously preserved, with a handwritten label, "The Crossing, October 17, 1994. The contents of that tape, analyzed by FBI forensic experts and partially released to the public months later, would reveal the fate of Thomas and Eleanor Winters and expose a truth that had been hidden beneath Lake Talcott for thousands of years. The first section of the tape showed Thomas and Eleanor at the lake house on the evening of October 17, 1994. Thomas was setting up the camera on a tripod in the living room, periodically checking the frame to ensure both he and Eleanor were visible. The time stamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked, her voice containing a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Once we start, there's no going back." Thomas nodded, his expression serious but determined. "My grandfather devoted his life to understanding this. We owe it to him to document what happens. Besides, if what his journal says is true, we will be making history tonight." What followed was 40 minutes of Thomas and Eleanor discussing Alfred's journal and the photograph they had found hidden in the lake house months before their anniversary trip. They had been researching the Watchers of Talcott and the strange history of the lake for nearly a year. Thomas had connected his grandfather's notes about celestial alignments to a rare astronomical event that would occur on October 17, 1994, a specific configuration of planets that happened only once every 62 years. According to the journal, Thomas explained to the camera, when this alignment occurs, the surface of Lake Talcott becomes something called a threshold. Grandfather and his colleagues believed they had discovered a doorway to somewhere else. Their final meeting in 1932 was an attempt to close this doorway permanently. But Grandfather feared they had only delayed whatever was trying to come through. Eleanor held up a page of the journal, showing complex mathematical equations and astronomical charts. "We think the original structure was built as a containment mechanism, not a doorway. The indigenous people who lived here understood something about this place that science is only now beginning to grasp. The lake isn't just a body of water, it's a barrier between dimensions." At 12:37 a.m., Thomas checked his watch and nodded to Eleanor. "It's time. The alignment will be exact in 8 minutes." They turned off all the lights in the house except for a single lamp, gathered flashlights, and the camera was picked up, creating a jerky transition as Thomas removed it from the tripod. The next segment showed them walking down to the lake's edge. The night was unnaturally still, and the water's surface reflected the stars perfectly, creating the illusion of an infinite sky both above and below. "Look," Eleanor whispered, pointing to the center of the lake. The camera zoomed in, showing what appeared to be a disturbance in the water, a rippling effect that spread outward in perfect concentric circles from the center point. As the ripples reached the shore, they didn't break as normal waves would. Instead, they seemed to pass through the land and continue outward. "It's starting," Thomas said, his voice hushed with awe. "Just like Grandfather described it." The camera then showed Eleanor removing her shoes and stepping into the water at the edge of the dock. "It's not cold," she said with surprise. "It feels welcoming." Thomas handed the camera to Eleanor and removed his own shoes. The frame showed him stepping into the water beside her. "We need to reach the center," he said. "That's where the threshold will open." But what happened next defied explanation. As they waded deeper, the water never seemed to rise above their ankles, no matter how far from shore they walked. The camera panned down, showing their feet moving across what should have been deep water, yet they appeared to be walking on a solid but invisible surface just beneath the water's edge. "It's the pathway," Thomas exclaimed, his voice filled with vindication. Grandfather was right about everything. The camera turned to show the shore behind them, now distant. The lake house was visible only as a dark silhouette against the night sky. Ahead, the center of the lake seemed to be glowing with a faint luminescence that hadn't been visible from the shore. As they approached the center, Eleanor gasped. The camera swung wildly for a moment before focusing on what had startled her. Below their feet, visible through the shallow water they were somehow walking upon, were stone structures, the very megalithic monument that would not be discovered by the rest of the world until 2023. "The original containment structure," Thomas whispered. "It's been here all along, hidden in plain sight." They reached the center of the lake, standing now on what was recognizably the same central platform that would later be revealed by the Drought. The basin in the middle was filled with water that moved in unnatural ways, swirling against the current of the rest of the lake, glowing with that same strange luminescence. Thomas checked his watch again. 1 minute until perfect alignment. Eleanor turned the camera to show her face. She appeared both terrified and exhilarated. "If we don't return," she said, looking directly into the lens, "know that we chose this. We are about to see what no human has seen for thousands of years. Whatever happens, this is our decision." The camera turned back to Thomas, who was now kneeling beside the basin, running his fingers through the glowing water. "It's happening," he said, his voice filled with wonder. The water in the basin began to move more rapidly, the swirling motion creating a vortex that seemed to descend far deeper than the basin itself should have allowed. The glow intensified, illuminating the entire stone circle with an unearthly light. Thomas stood and took Eleanor's hand. With his free hand, he reached into his pocket and removed 2 wedding rings, their wedding rings. He held them up to the camera. "Our offering," he explained. "The journal says a personal sacrifice is required to open the threshold safely." He dropped the rings into the vortex, where they disappeared instantly. The water in the basin suddenly stilled, becoming a perfect mirror that reflected not the sky above but something else entirely, a landscape unlike anything on Earth. Where stars should have been reflected, strange structures rose in impossible geometries. Where the moon should have appeared, multiple suns of varying colors hung in an alien sky. "The door is open," Thomas whispered. He reached out his hand, and Eleanor gave him the camera. The frame showed her stepping onto the surface of the now still water in the basin. Instead of breaking the surface, her foot seemed to pass through it as if through a membrane, disappearing into the reflection below. "I can see it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It's beautiful, Thomas. Like nothing we ever imagined." She extended her hand back toward him. "Are you coming?" The camera showed Thomas's hand reaching out to take hers. Then, in the final moments of the footage, The camera was carefully placed on the edge of the basin, positioned to continue recording. The frame showed both Thomas and Eleanor now, standing hand in hand at the edge of the impossible doorway. They looked at each other one last time, nodded in unison, and stepped forward together, passing through the mirror-like surface and vanishing completely from view. The camera continued recording for another 12 minutes, showing only the still surface of the basin, reflecting that alien landscape before the water began to move again, the vortex reforming and then collapsing in on itself. The reflection changed once again, showing only the ordinary night sky. And then, in the final seconds of the tape, something reached through the surface of the water, a hand, but not a human one. It groped blindly for a moment before finding the camera. The last image, frozen in analysis by FBI technicians, and showed what appeared to be a face emerging from the water, a face with features that matched those of the deliberately distorted figures carved around the edge of the basin thousands of years ago. The screen then went black. When the drought ended in late 2023 and the waters of Lake Talcott rose again, they covered the stone circle once more, hiding it from view. But the knowledge of what lay beneath the surface and what had happened to Thomas and Eleanor Winters on that October night in 1904 could never be hidden again. The case was officially closed, the disappearance classified as voluntary departure to unknown location. But the questions it raised remain unanswered, echoing through the scientific and philosophical communities like ripples across the surface of a still lake. What had Alfred Winters and his colleagues discovered in the 1930s? What was the true purpose of the ancient stone structure hidden beneath Lake Talcott? And most disturbing of all, where exactly had Thomas and Eleanor gone, and what had they allowed to come back? As Agent Donovan wrote in the conclusion of her memoir, some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. Thomas and Eleanor Winters found their threshold. In doing so, then, they may have created one for all of us, a threshold between comfortable ignorance and a truth we may not be prepared to face. Lake Talcott remains open to the public. Tourism has increased dramatically since the release of the VHS Tape Contents. People stand on its shores, staring out at the still waters, wondering what might lie beneath. And every 62 years, when the stars align in that specific configuration, the lake house, now a historical landmark protected by the state, stands empty and locked, its doors and windows secured, its lights extinguished. The revelation of the VHS tape's contents in late 2023 transformed what had been a cold case into a national obsession. News outlets ran continuous coverage, experts from various fields offered theories, and social media exploded with discussions, debates, and conspiracy theories. The hashtag Lake Talcott became the top trending topic for weeks, with millions sharing their thoughts on what had truly happened to Thomas and Eleanor Winters. But while the public's attention focused primarily on the couple's apparent voluntary passage through what many were calling an interdimensional portal, a smaller team of investigators had begun looking more closely at the final, but disturbing moments captured on the tape, the non-human hand and face emerging from the water after the couple had disappeared. This specialized task force, assembled under strict confidentiality by the FBI's Unusual Phenomena Division, a department whose existence was itself classified, was led by Dr. Victor Reynolds, a physicist with a background in theoretical quantum mechanics and a consultant for various government agencies since the early 2000s. What we are dealing with here isn't just a missing persons case anymore, Dr. Reynolds told his team during their first briefing in December 2023. This is potentially first contact with a non-terrestrial intelligence, or NT. The implications extend far beyond the fate of two individuals. The task force established a research facility in an unmarked building near Lake Talcott, equipped with advanced monitoring equipment designed to detect anomalies in electromagnetic fields, radiation levels, and gravitational fluctuations around the lake. Their work was conducted under the guise of an environmental research project studying drought impacts. What they discovered in the months that followed would never be fully revealed to the public. Official reports would be heavily redacted, and team members would sign lifetime non-disclosure agreements. But through various leaks, whistleblower testimonies, and freedom of information requests filed by persistent journalists and civilian research groups, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Lake Talcott wasn't just a doorway to somewhere else. It was a prison. The first indication came from a more thorough translation of the symbols carved into the megalithic structure at the lake's center. Dr. Amara Jackson, a linguist specializing in pre-Columbian writing systems, made the breakthrough in February 2024. These aren't decorative or ceremonial markings, she explained in a recorded meeting that would later be leaked online. And they are warnings. The recurring motif that we initially thought represented a pathway or bridge actually translates closer to containment or boundary. In this sequence here, which appears at regular intervals around the circle, it's a counting system. They were keeping track of something, specifically of how many times something tried to get out. Further analysis of sediment cores taken from the lake bed revealed another troubling detail. The lake wasn't thousands of years old as initially believed. It was artificial, created approximately 4,200 years ago through a deliberate flooding of the area. The stone structure hadn't been built underwater, it had been intentionally submerged. The indigenous legends about the hungry waters began to take on new significance. What had been dismissed as superstition now appeared to be encoded warnings, passed down through generations, about the true nature of the lake and what it contained. But it was the discovery made on April 17, 2024, that would ultimately connect all the pieces. During routine monitoring, the equipment at the research facility detected an unprecedented spike in activity, a massive fluctuation in the electromagnetic field centered precisely above the stone structure in the lake's center. But when investigators reviewed the astronomical data for that day, they found that while it wasn't the exact 62-year alignment mentioned in Alfred Winters' journal, it was a minor alignment involving two of the same planets. The partial key, as one researcher described it, that had momentarily weakened whatever force normally contained what lay beyond the threshold. The lake's surface had remained calm to visual observation, but the instruments told a different story. Something had tried to come through, and the barriers were growing weaker. The investigation shifted focus, moving from what had happened to Thomas and Eleanor to the more pressing question of what might happen next. The team began searching for more information about Alfred Winters and the other members of the Watchers of Talcott, hoping to discover what they had learned in the 1930s and what measures they had taken to close the doorway. Archives at Miskatonic University, where Alfred had been a professor, yielded partial answers. In a collection of his personal papers, donated after his death, but never properly catalogued. Researchers found correspondence between Alfred and the other members of the group dating from 1928 to 1932. The letters revealed that their interest in Lake Talcott had begun with William Jameson, the British astronomer, who had noticed unusual astronomical alignments associated with the lake's geographical position. According to Jameson's calculations, Lake Talcott sat at a precise point where certain celestial configurations created what he called a cosmic thinning, a weakening of the barriers between dimensions. Alfred Winters, with his background in theoretical physics, had provided the mathematical framework to understand this phenomenon. In one letter to Richard Sullivan, dated November 1929, he wrote, "The multiverse theory we have been developing isn't just theoretical. Lake Talcott provides empirical evidence that parallel dimensions exist and can, under specific conditions, intersect with our own. The indigenous structures weren't built to open a doorway, they were built to regulate one that already existed naturally. The question now is whether the original builders were trying to keep something out, or something in." By 1930, the group had apparently determined it was the latter. The lake was a containment system for something that had entered our world thousands of years ago, something the original builders had been unable to send back but had managed to trap within the lake using the stone structure as a kind of dimensional anchor. Every 62 years, when the specific astronomical alignment occurred, the containment weakened. The original builders had created a ritual to strengthen the barriers during these periods of vulnerability, a ritual that required a willing sacrifice. This explained the pattern of disappearances around the lake. What had been interpreted as people falling victim to some predatory force was actually something very different. They had been volunteers, chosen or self-selected to maintain the containment. But in 1932, during what Alfred called their final meeting, something had gone wrong. The group had attempted to permanently seal the threshold, to end the need for the 62-year sacrifices. Their effort had partially succeeded but created an unintended consequence. The threshold had been stabilized, but at a cost it now required more than just the symbolic offering of personal items that had sufficed in previous cycles. It required a complete passage, a full crossing by conscious, willing participants. As Alfred wrote in what appeared to be his final letter to Joseph Caldwell, the former minister who by then was already showing signs of mental instability, "We have made things worse, not better. The barrier is stronger between alignments, yes, but the price during the alignment is higher. And something has learned from our attempt. It's watching now, waiting. I have destroyed most of our research, but I have hidden enough at the lake house for my descendants to understand if they ever need to. God help them if they do. God help us all if the containment ever fails completely." The Watchers of Talcott had disbanded after their failed attempt, each carrying the burden of what they had done and what they had learned. Their subsequent deaths and disappearances, previously seen as suspicious coincidences, and now appeared to be the result of something more deliberate, an entity reaching out from its prison, eliminating those who knew too much about its nature and the mechanisms of its containment. Only Alfred had survived, protected perhaps by his decision to destroy most of their research and to stay far away from the lake. But he had preserved enough information for his grandson to eventually discover the truth, a decision that would ultimately lead Thomas and Eleanor to make their fateful choice in 1994. With this historical context now understood, the task force turned its attention to the most crucial question: when would the next full alignment occur? And what would happen if no one was there to make the crossing? Astronomical calculations provided a precise date, October 17, 2056. But there was a more immediate concern. The partial alignments, which occurred more frequently, were showing increasing levels of activity with each occurrence. The containment was degrading faster than the original 62-year cycle would suggest. But something on the other side was getting stronger, more determined. And it had help. In May 2024, local authorities reported a disturbing trend. People had begun gathering at Lake Talcott in small groups, conducting what appeared to be unauthorized rituals at the water's edge. When questioned, many of them described having dreams about the ones beneath the water and feeling compelled to help them come home. Analysis of social media posts revealed hundreds of similar accounts from people across the country, many of whom were making plans to visit the lake. The common thread in these dreams was a specific image, a face with distorted features, the same face captured in the final frame of the VHS tape. Whatever had reached through after Thomas and Eleanor crossed over wasn't just physically testing the barriers. It was reaching into the minds of susceptible individuals, creating what one psychologist on the task force described as a cult of return. The situation escalated on June 17, 2024, exactly 92 years after the final meeting of the original Watchers. Shortly after midnight, a group of 23 people broke through the security perimeter that had been established around the lake and rushed into the water. And by the time authorities could respond, all 23 had disappeared beneath the surface. Dive teams found no bodies. Sonar scanning showed no human remains anywhere in the lake. The 23 had simply vanished, but they had left something behind. On the shore, arranged in a perfect circle, were 23 sealed envelopes. Each contained a handwritten note with the same message: "We go to prepare the way. When the circle is complete, they will return, all of them." Then, the incident was contained from a media perspective, officially reported as a mass suicide by a doomsday cult, but within the task force, it created a new urgency. Whatever was happening was accelerating. The next full alignment was still decades away, but it might not matter if the containment was being systematically weakened from both sides. In July 2024, Dr. Reynolds proposed a radical solution. If the stone structure at the center of the lake was the key to the containment system, then perhaps the answer was to remove the lake entirely, to drain it completely and study the structure directly, to understand its mechanisms and reinforce them. The proposal was met with significant resistance from both government officials concerned about public reaction and scientists worried about unforeseen consequences. But as evidence mounted that the situation was deteriorating rapidly, the decision was made to proceed with a modified version of the plan. Rather than draining the entire lake, a process that would be time-consuming and difficult to conceal from the public, a coffer dam would be constructed around the central structure, allowing the research team to access it directly while maintaining the appearance of normal lake conditions to outside observers. Construction began in August 2024, disguised as an infrastructure project to improve the lake's drought resilience. A temporary causeway was built from the shore to the center of the lake, and giant pumps were installed to remove water from within the enclosure once the dam was complete. Progress was rapid at first, but as the dam neared completion, problems began to emerge. Equipment malfunctioned in inexplicable ways. Workers reported disorientation and missing time. Several suffered what appeared to be hallucinations, describing encounters with people in the water who weren't there when others looked, and the dreams spread. Not just among random individuals across the country now, but concentrated among those working directly on the project. Security personnel began finding workers sleepwalking toward the lake at night. 3 were prevented from drowning themselves after being found wading into deeper water while in a trance-like state. Despite these difficulties, the dam was completed on September 21, 2024, and the pumps were activated. As water was removed from the enclosure, the full megalithic structure was revealed for the first time in thousands of years. It was larger and more complex than the drought-exposed portions had suggested. The standing stones formed not 1 but 3 concentric circles around the central platform, with intricate channels cut between them. The symbols carved into the stones were more varied and numerous, covering nearly every available surface. And at the very center, where the basin had been observed, was something new, a stone pedestal rising from the middle of the basin, carved in the shape of a perfect cube. Dr. Jackson, working with a team of linguists and archaeologists, began a comprehensive documentation of every symbol, hoping to fully decode the structure's purpose and operational mechanisms. Engineers examined the channels and the overall design, noting how water would flow through the system when the lake was at its normal level. But it was Dr. Reynolds who made the most significant discovery. Using specialized equipment designed to detect quantum fluctuations, he identified what he called a dimensional thin point directly above the stone cube. "It's as if reality itself is stretched thinner here," he explained in a recorded briefing. Under normal conditions, the water acts as a dampening agent, distributing the effect across its surface. But now that we have removed the water, the thin point is concentrated in a single location. It's more active, more unstable. Measurements confirmed his assessment. The quantum fluctuations were increasing in both frequency and intensity. What had been a stable containment system for thousands of years had been fundamentally disrupted by their intervention. The decision was made to refill the enclosure immediately, to restore the dampening effect of the water. But before the process could begin, a final examination of the stone cube was conducted. High-resolution scanning revealed previously undetected seams in the seemingly solid stone. The cube was actually a container of some kind. Against the urgent advice of several team members, authorization was given to open the cube. What they found inside would change the nature of the investigation entirely. The cube contained a single object, a small figurine, approximately 6 inches tall, carved from an unknown material that scanning equipment could not identify. It depicted a humanoid form with the same distorted features seen in the carvings around the basin and in the final frame of the VHS tape. When the figurine was removed from the cube for closer examination, the quantum fluctuations spiked dramatically. Then the dimensional thin point, previously stable if active, began to expand. Security footage from the research platform shows what happened next. The air above the stone pedestal where the cube had been placed began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The shimmer expanded, forming a perfect sphere approximately 3 feet in diameter. Within this sphere, reality itself seemed to distort, light bent in impossible ways, and through the distortion, something else became visible. Another world. The same alien landscape that had been reflected in the basin water on the night Thomas and Eleanor disappeared. Before evacuation orders could be fully implemented, the sphere expanded suddenly, engulfing the research platform and everyone on it. When the effect subsided seconds later, 27 researchers, technicians, and security personnel had vanished. And in their place stood two figures. Thomas and Eleanor Winters had returned, but they were no longer entirely human. Security camera footage, later confiscated by federal authorities but leaked in fragments online, showed the couple walking calmly through the chaos that followed. Their movements were fluid but somehow wrong, as if they were not entirely comfortable with the mechanics of human locomotion. Their expressions remained fixed in serene smiles that never reached their eyes. And when they spoke, their voices contained subtle harmonics that standard audio equipment could barely capture. "We have come to prepare you," Eleanor was recorded saying to a security guard who attempted to stop them. "The separation was a mistake. They wish to share themselves with us, as they have shared with us. It is a gift beyond comprehension." The couple easily evaded containment efforts, walking through solid barriers, as if they were mirages and causing electronic systems to fail in their presence. They made their way to the shore, where a crowd had gathered despite the security perimeter, people drawn by the same dreams that had affected the workers, all of them waiting as if they somehow knew what was about to happen. Thomas and Eleanor waded into the water hand in hand, the crowd following behind them like sleepwalkers. Witnesses from nearby observation points described how the water seemed to reach up, to embrace them, forming tendrils that wrapped around their bodies not like drowning waves but like welcoming arms. One by one, Thomas, Eleanor, and 48 followers disappeared beneath the surface. And one by one, something else emerged, human forms that moved with the same fluid wrongness, wore the same empty smiles, spoke with the same harmonic voices. "We are the first," the thing that had been Thomas Winters announced to the horrified observers who had not been affected by the dream compulsion. "But not the last. The way is opening, and the circle will be completed." The transformed humans dispersed before a full military response could be organized, disappearing into the surrounding area. Despite an intensive search operation involving federal, state, and local authorities, none of them were located. 2 days later, reports began coming in from across the country. People were behaving strangely in scattered locations, walking into lakes, rivers, even the ocean, and emerging changed. But each new conversion created a ripple effect, with more people experiencing the dreams, more feeling the compulsion to find water, to make the connection, to become complete. On October 1st, 2024, with the phenomenon spreading at an alarming rate, President Harlow addressed the nation. In the speech, carefully worded to prevent panic while conveying the gravity of the situation, acknowledged the events at Lake Talcott, and announced the implementation of containment protocols nationwide. Military forces were deployed to secure major water bodies. A nationwide curfew was established. Research teams worked around the clock to develop methods of identifying those who had been affected by the dream compulsion and those who had already been transformed. But the entity or entities from beyond the threshold had been contained for thousands of years. They had learned patience, and they had learned adaptation. The transformed humans began to change their approach. Instead of attempting mass conversions, they focused on strategic targets, individuals with access to critical infrastructure, decision-makers in government and military, those whose positions could be leveraged to further their agenda from within the system. By late October 2024, counterintelligence operations had identified infiltrations in multiple federal agencies, military commands, and research facilities. The entity was no longer just breaking through from its own side, it was systematically dismantling the mechanisms of resistance from ours. It was at this critical juncture that the breakthrough came, not from the specialized task force or the combined resources of national security agencies, but from a small team of independent researchers who had been studying Alfred Winters' original papers and the historical records of indigenous practices around Lake Talcott. Dr. Layla Patel, an archaeoastronomer who had been consulting with the task force but working independently on historical aspects of the case, had discovered a pattern in the original containment structure that had been overlooked. The three concentric circles of standing stones weren't just architectural elements, they were a calculating device, that prehistoric computer designed to track not just the 62-year major alignment, but hundreds of minor alignments. And more importantly, they were a key to understanding how the original containment had worked. The water wasn't just a passive barrier, it was an active component of the system, programmed by the flow channels to respond to specific astronomic conditions. They didn't just build a prison, Dr. Patel explained in her emergency presentation to task force leaders. They built a self-adjusting prison, one that could adapt to the prisoner's attempts to escape. But it requires human intervention during the major alignments, a reset of the system, a recalibration. That's what the willing sacrifice actually was. Not a payment, but a human administrator performing maintenance. This revelation provided a new understanding of what Thomas and Eleanor had unknowingly done. By crossing the threshold without understanding the full purpose of the ritual, they had essentially performed only half the necessary procedure. They had opened the door but had not reset the locks afterward. With the next major alignment still decades away, the question became whether the system could be manually reset without waiting for the astronomical trigger. Dr. Patel believed it could, but it would require replicating the original conditions as closely as possible, including the human component. Someone will have to go through, she concluded. But this time with the right instructions, the right understanding of what needs to be done on the other side. The implications were clear and horrifying. It would be a one-way journey. There would be no return for whoever undertook the mission. And given what had happened to Thomas and Eleanor, there was no guarantee that the human operator would remain human enough to complete the task once they crossed over. Volunteers were sought from among the scientific and military personnel already cleared for the highly classified operation. The selection process was rigorous, focusing not just on technical qualifications but on psychological resilience and the specific neurological profile that preliminary research suggested might be resistant to the entity's influence. On November 12, 2024, Dr. Victor Reynolds himself was selected as the primary operator, with two military specialists as backup in case he was unable to complete the mission. The operation was scheduled for November 17th, thus a date chosen because it represented a minor alignment that would make the crossing possible without fully weakening the containment. The cofferdam, which had been hastily refilled after the September incident, was partially drained again, exposing only the central platform and basin, while leaving the rest of the structure submerged as it was meant to be. Dr. Reynolds was equipped with a specially designed suit that would theoretically shield him from the entity's immediate influence long enough to complete the reset procedure. The suit contained no electronics, which had proven vulnerable to the entity's effects, but instead used mechanical systems for life support and monitoring. The reset procedure itself, derived from Dr. Patel's analysis of the original structure and indigenous records, this involved a sequence of physical adjustments to components within the stone cube, essentially a mechanical key that had to be turned from both sides of the threshold. And as a final precaution, a fail-safe was implemented. If Dr. Reynolds could not complete the procedure, or if the entity attempted to use the opening to send more of itself through instead of allowing the reset, the entire lake basin would be destabilized using precisely placed explosive charges, collapsing the structure and hopefully sealing the threshold permanently, though at an enormous cost to the surrounding area. On the designated evening, with military forces securing a 10-mile perimeter around Lake Talcott, Dr. Reynolds made his final preparations. The last footage of him, recorded on a mechanical film camera to avoid electronic interference, shows him reviewing the procedure one final time with Dr. Patel. The entity will try to convince you that you are making a mistake, she reminded him. It will use everything it has learned about human psychology against you. Dr. Reynolds nodded, his expression resolute. I have been studying it as much as it's been studying us. I know what to expect. And if you encounter Thomas and Eleanor? She asked. Or whatever they have become, then I will complete the mission regardless, he replied. There's too much at stake now for hesitation. The actual crossing was not directly observed. For safety reasons, all personnel were required to maintain a minimum distance from the central platform. Remote monitoring was conducted using mechanical systems, pressure sensors, tripwires, and film cameras with automated triggers. What these systems recorded was a brief, intense light emanating from the basin, lasting approximately 7.3 seconds. When the light faded, Dr. Reynolds was gone. For several tense minutes, there was no indication of whether the mission had succeeded or failed, but the contingency teams prepared to implement the fail-safe protocol. Then, at exactly midnight, the water of Lake Talcott, the entire lake, not just the section within the cofferdam, began to glow with the same luminescence observed in the VHS footage from 1994. The glow pulsed in a regular rhythm, like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each pulse. Sensors around the lake perimeter detected massive energy fluctuations, far greater than anything previously recorded. The quantum thin point expanded, not just above the central platform but across the entire lake's surface. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The glow faded. The energy readings returned to baseline. The lake's surface became perfectly still, reflecting the night sky without distortion. Initial analysis suggested the reset had been successful, and the containment had been restored and strengthened. But the cost had been high. Dr. Reynolds had not returned and was presumed lost, along with Thomas and Eleanor Winters and dozens of others who had crossed the threshold before him. In the days that followed, the transformed humans who had been spreading the entity's influence began to change again. Some collapsed, their bodies unable to maintain cohesion without the continuous connection to their source. Others seemed to become more fully human again, though with no memory of their actions while under the entity's control. The crisis appeared to be over. Containment had been restored. The threshold was closed. But there were lingering questions that haunted those who knew the full truth. Had Dr. Reynolds actually succeeded in resetting the system? Or had the entity simply retreated, adapting once again, learning from this latest interaction with humanity? The megalithic structure remained beneath Lake Talcott, the water once again hiding its secrets. The cofferdam was removed, all research facilities dismantled. The area was designated a restricted zone, permanently closed to the public under the guise of environmental protection. A new organization was formed, operating in the shadows of various government agencies, its purpose to monitor Lake Talcott and prepare for the next alignment in 2056. They called themselves the New Watchers, a direct reference to Alfred Winters' original group. And in a secure facility deep beneath the Pentagon, a sealed vault contains the contingency plans for a worst-case scenario, the complete destruction of Lake Talcott and everything within it, that should the containment ever fail completely. But perhaps the most disturbing element of the entire case emerged in April 2025, nearly 6 months after Dr. Reynolds' crossing. During a routine security sweep of the restricted zone around Lake Talcott, guards discovered a message carved into a tree near the shore. The message was simple but chilling: "I have seen what they truly are, and the containment must be maintained at all costs. They are not what they claim to be, and they are not returning home. They were never from there to begin with. They are not the prisoners, we are." Analysis confirmed the handwriting matched Dr. Victor Reynolds. Lake Talcott remains still and silent, a perfect mirror reflecting the sky above. But those who know its true nature understand that the reflection is also a window, and something is always watching from the other side. And the crossing of 2056 approaches, and the water waits.